33 young men and boys were brutally restrained, abused, raped, and murdered. It was all done by one man. His name, John Wayne Gacy. Because of John Wayne's past and his killings, he is one of the most known serial killers in America. He did unthinkable things that made people stop in their tracks. One thing is for sure, John Wayne Gacy was a sadistic murderer that killed 33 young boys and men. In my speech, I will be going over John's background and home life, his drive to take lives of his victims, and what he would do with his victims' remains, and how he got caught. So John was born March 17th, 1942. He lived with his mother, father, and two sisters. John was very close with his mother and sisters, but his relationship with his father was not the same. His father was an alcoholic who was very abusive. According to the John Wayne Gacy biography, John's father was thought to have abused John because he was an unathletic, overweight kid that had feminine personalities. John Wayne was only 7 years old in 1949 when he got his first reports of allegedly sexually abusing neighborhood kids. When John was at the age of 18, he moved out of his parents' house and earned a degree in business. In 1966, Gacy moved to Waterloo, Iowa, and married his wife Marlene. After the move, John worked for his father-in-law as a manager of multiple KFCs in Chicago. Doing so boosted John's public figure and made him a very well-known community member, and even earned Man of the Year. So how could such a public figure turn into the murderer that he was? Well, a couple years after Gacy and his family lived in Waterloo, he built up a good name for himself. He was first charged with a sexual assault, according to Amber B., and it was shocking to the community. A 15-year-old boy was told that he had to do oral sex acts on John Wayne Gacy. This 15-year-old boy ended up turning this into his mother, who then turned it into the police. There was many other similar stories about Gacy, but none other were reported. Gacy had the community on his side, and the community said he would do no such thing, but he was still arrested and convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison. But because of Gacy's power and in the community, he was treated very well in his time behind bars. People in prison called him the master manipulator. 2 years after Gacy's prison time, he was let out on parole for good behavior. He was only in there for 2 years out of 10. John's wife filed for divorce, though, and he no longer had a job out of prison. So John moved back with his mother in Chicago and started his own construction company. John would also dress up as Pogo the Clown for parties and charity events as a side gig, once again raising him to the top of the political food chain in his neighborhood and gaining a lot of respect from the community. Eventually, Gacy got his own homes, and this is what caused and started the sexual acts and killings. According to Phillips, he wrote a paper that the interviewers told him about. These interviewers were from John Wayne Gacy's actual interviewees, and Phillips had wrote a paper about it. And the interviewers told Phillips that Pogo became a regular, and John said that Pogo would not make him want to lure kids back, but more sexually aroused and have power over younger boys. The interviewers also told Philip that Pogo was used to pick out victims that he would later pursue. When Gacy would pursue victims, he was normally dressed as a police officer or just convinced his victims to come into his car and go back to his house with him. The word spread fast that John Wayne was creepy towards younger men and boys. Boys would even tell their parents and police officers that a man named John tried to get them into his car. This led to an investigation at John's home, but police came up with nothing. After the investigation, multiple missing people came about, including a 9-year-old boy, a 19-year-old boy, and a 15-year-old. Also, many young men had reported sexual assaults against Gacy. Another interview with Gacy after his arrest also reported that Gacy told police that his victims would come into his home. He would then convince them to do sexual acts or restrain them and force them to do so. He would gain power, he said, felt sexual pleasure and felt powerful. While doing this, he would then stab or cut his victims or strangle them and kill them. Gacy also told authorities that he would get his workers to dig trenches under his house in his crawl space, and that's where he would put his victims. His workers thought they were digging for pipes, but this was not the case. Gacy would take his victims and bury their bodies down there. After investigation, when John Wayne was arrested, it was thought that 29 bodies were buried under his house. So how could a person be capable of this massacre and not get caught, you might ask? Well, John Gacy did get caught. And according to Amber, she states that Gacy got caught on December 12th, 1978. A 15-year-old boy named Robert Peace told his mother he was going to speak with a construction contractor to seek a better employment. This contractor turned out to be John. Robert was reported missing later that night by his mother. Police asked to question John, but he did not show up. According to Amber, Gacy was dumping Robert's body in the Des Plaines River while he was supposed to be doing his interview. 28 bodies were found in Gacy's crawl space, and 5 were found in the local river. Gacy was charged on January 10th, 1979, and in 1994, Gacy was executed by lethal injections. For my visual aids, first, we have, this is the actual crawl space under John Wayne's house, and these are the numbers that investigators would put, and this was released to the public. This is also a picture of John Wayne when he was first convicted. He's laughing in his picture. My sources were written by Amber Bellis. She wrote How the Police Finally Caught John Wayne Gacy to 33 Murders. A. Jenkins wrote an encyclopedia-type paper called The John Wayne Gacy. And my third source was written by T. Theodore in the John Wayne Gacy serial killer biography.